It is the month of love,
Oh, yes. All of the love is in the air.
which is why we think it's so important to start talking about intimacy.
That's right. We're going to be talking about intimacy, not sex. Get your head out of the gutter.
I mean, it can lead there. I mean, definitely could talk about it.
Oh,
For shizzle.
we have that on the calendar. We're going to be talking about sex. We're going to have an entire episode on sex, but this is not that episode because intimacy is not just sex.
Okay. No, I know. I agree with you. It's physical, it's emotional, mental, and spiritual connection. Absolutely. And it can be present in any type of relationship. I know we often associate intimacy with intimate or romantic relationships, but side note, as I was putting my show notes together, I came across these 8 stages of intimacy. And I know that they were meant to be a partner, and I'm not going to bring them on. I'm not going to necessarily talk about it on the show. It might be its own separate episode. But I was going through it. I noticed that City and I met 7 of the 8. The only one we were lacking was sexual intimacy. And I was like, well, there's still hope.
There's still some hope, maybe.
I don't like to be a quitter. I like to, hit all 8 boxes. So.
You would get FOMO reading something being like, I'm not in a romantic relationship here, but damn it, this platonic relationship doesn't hit all the boxes.
You read my mind. But before we get into this like intimacy and why it's so important, a question that kind of came up for me was like, do you believe, is it love or intimacy that's more important in a relationship, in a romantic relationship?
In a romantic relationship, I would say I don't even see the difference. I feel like intimacy helps nurture the love, but you don't get to intimacy if there isn't love there already. It's like this symbiotic relationship.
So is it like the chicken before the egg kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's what it sounds like. It feels like because, you love someone, you want to be more intimate with them. The more intimate you are, the greater your love and capacity for love for that person increases.
Funny for me, I was reading this article and it said that about when that question was posed to couples, 80% of them said love, but in actuality, it's intimacy that's more important, according to this guy, and I forgot his name. I'll figure it out and put it in the show notes later. But it made sense to me because I would agree that it is intimacy. So, for listeners, my husband and I were in a rough patch, and we were on the verge of divorce, and I found myself saying, like, love isn't enough. Love isn't enough. And it was the absence of that intimacy, that emotional, intellectual, and spiritual connection that posed the greatest risk to my relationship. And so I think that love is a beautiful byproduct of intimacy. I think it comes out of intimacy. But they were just talking about how the majority of divorces or people that do get divorced, it's not that there is a lack of love, but a lack of intimacy.
Oh, that's interesting. That would make sense. I mean, there's all kinds of things that lead to divorce, and we've had plenty of time to study all of that. But now we are, here in this intimacy world, and I found it really fascinating.
Oh man, I did too. What did you come up with?
Did you know that there are? Excuse me. Did you know that besides sex, there are 4 types of intimacy?
And what are they?
They are emotional intimacy, intellectual intimacy, experiential intimacy, and spiritual intimacy. So if we go and break each one of these down, emotional intimacy is what allows you to let your guard down with someone. And really, you are sharing your emotions. You feel safe to do so. That's going to be the big component in the emotional intimacy category. In the intellectual intimacy category, you're getting to know how the other person's mind works. And basically, you're sharing a roadmap of your mind with them. And you're able to have conversations, stimulating conversations, where you could have totally different points of view. And it's okay because that's part of the exciting part of having this intellectual intimacy. Side note, I love a good conversation, and like show me what you're passionate about in a conversation, and I get so excited. Like that's one of my favorite ways of, I guess, being intimate with people. So for me, it's like, oh my God, you're smart, like you're so hot. But it's really more of your
smart
passionate.
Is sexy.
Smart
Absolutely.
Is super sexy. Experiential though is when you do things together. So like you and your husband just ran a 5K together. Like that is quality time, which I know is one of your big love language ways of showing love. And so the more you're able to share experiences, that is considered a form of intimacy. And then, of course, spiritual, where it could be your religious beliefs, but really just talking about what you believe about the world overall. And it's like, oh, having all of these different types of intimacy that don't necessarily have anything to do with an eggplant emoji.
I agree. And we were kind of circling this topic, and I was thinking back to my marriage with my husband and how it was on the rocks, and this need for intimacy. And really being intimate is being vulnerable. And I was like, what makes us so hesitant to be vulnerable with someone? And it's this fear of rejection or judgment. And so I even went back further in terms of where does our need for intimacy come from? And I was very fascinated because, our ancestors lived in big families or small communities. And so these close-knit communities would work together to provide for most of our needs, such as, physical support, emotional support, safety, food, shelter. In today's society, specifically the American culture, we're able to meet all of our needs ourselves. And so it supports this need or serves our need of autonomy, but not for intimacy. And so, with technology advancements, the internet, the rise in social media, remote work, DoorDash, online learning, all of these things, in my opinion, have stifled our ability to engage with people and to develop meaningful relationships with others. And according to Psychology Today, it's because of this cultural change that most people have not learned how to reliably sustain pleasure in intimate relationships.
Because of the separation with others.
This level of autonomy that we have. I don't need a person for anything. I can do it myself.
Mm-hmm. Which makes sense. I mean, because how often have you felt totally alone and yet you're in a giant conference room with like a ton of people? Or you're in a space, like you're here with other people, but if you don't have that connection piece, if you don't allow yourself to do that, it can be a really lonely world.
It absolutely can. And I know that this is going to be right up your alley have we talked about capitalism in this episode?
Not yet.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So thanks to capitalism, because there is a shift happening. And so thanks to capitalism, the American workforce assigns a person's worth, as we know, to productivity, the number of hours you worked, are you exceeding your sales goals? And so while the pandemic may have encouraged autonomy, again, like DoorDash, all that stuff, I also think it surfaced or resurfaced our need for intimacy. So you and I have talked about the pandemic pause before, and this pause has invited the opportunity for us to reflect on our life. We've made career changes, rather than staying in relationships or situations where we're unhappy, people are actively seeking out happiness and fulfillment. And so not only do people want happiness and fulfillment now, they want it most in their intimate relationships. Would you agree, disagree?
I mean, it makes sense that, yeah, of course they want these things. I mean, it's one of those things where I think, from personal experience, I've just noticed that surface conversations don't do it for me anymore. Like, if you want to keep something surfacey, if that is where you want to be and that's your comfort zone, I get it. I will respect it. But like, Matt and I were on a walk yesterday, and they're redoing the baseball fields across the park that we live at. And like his family would not shut up about it. They were really excited about like, why are they ripping up the stuff? I was like, I could care less about this, right? Like literally talking about the surface. And he's like, oh, it'll be really exciting when all this stuff's on there. And then I said that. It was like, I could care less about the surface of what's going on over there. Like it has nothing to do with me, and I don't want to keep it surfacey. But then I did say, I was like, but I am interested as to why you're interested on it. And he's like, well, you don't really care about it, so I don't want to talk about it. And it shut down the whole conversation. Response. And it was super frustrating, but it was like, I'm on this planet right now. I want to be present, which is my current bracelet that I'm wearing. Thank you. Sorry for that. I want to be here. I want to have a meaningful conversation with you. And so if all we're doing is fact gathering, if all is like, oh yeah, tell me about that race you did yesterday. Oh yeah. How long did it take? Was that a personal record for you? Yeah. How was the weather that day? If that is the conversation we are having, I don't want it.
Oh no. I went on a trip with a friend of mine, and we were out somewhere, and we were in Florida, and she is a hotel secret shopper. But anyways, so this pool person, I don't know what you call them. I'm just gonna go with pool person.
Pool attendant?
Okay, sure. Pool attendant was like making small talk with us. Doesn't know that we're secret shoppers, but this friend of mine said there is a clear point in the conversation where your face just changes. Like you are over the conversation. I will make niceties with you, but if this goes more than a couple of minutes, I'm gone. Like I will physically be in the space, like share that space with you, but I'm not mentally there with you, and I will check out. I know that's rude. It's probably a little mean, but I'm just not interested in having, surfacey conversations. Mm-mm. It does nothing for me.
I don't think it does anything for anybody because you're not really connecting. What do you really learn about a person? And so we talk a lot about this in the lawyer group I'm involved in From Hostage to Hero about chasing resonance. And really what that is you're chasing a deep conversation where you feel seen, heard, and validated. And you don't get that where it's just like, oh yeah, tell me about the race. Yeah. Oh, you did it in 35 minutes. Oh, that was kind of fast for you. Or was that kind of slow for you? Like when you're just fact gathering of other people, you may think, oh, look, I'm very interested in this person, but no, you're not. You're at the surface. And really, I think a big part of it is wanting that connection, but being also able to say, can I trust this person with this piece of me?
That's interesting. That kind of goes into one of the reasons why we find intimacy so hard. I know we talked about vulnerability a little bit, and it's like if you're afraid of being vulnerable, then chances are you actually fear intimacy even though you crave it. Because we are afraid of being judged and can I trust that person? And in order to trust that person, I hate to say this, I hate when people tell me, you got to take a leap of faith. You do have to take a leap of faith and hope that person catches you. And if not, then but you're never going to know where that person stands in your life without, taking that leap of faith.
It is putting yourself out there, right? And having that faith, if you will, of, hey, I can go ahead and give this information to this person and they're going to respond in a way that is helpful and beneficial as opposed to judgy. Like, Ben, you know who these people are. There are certain things that I am willing to have a conversation with my mother about. There are way more things that I'm not, right? But I have found myself being in conversations, being like, am I going to share this piece with this person? And I think about it because I know what it is. I know if I disclose this, it's going to create a deeper level of intimacy, a deeper level of trust because I'm being vulnerable. And sometimes I will think to myself, man, I feel like I can't do that yet. And what it does for me, and I talked to my therapist about it, was, man, I don't think our relationship is as close because I wasn't willing to have this part of the conversation. And my therapist, being a therapist, turned it around on me. It was like, I'm more interested in as to why you thought you couldn't disclose. What was it about you in that situation as opposed to the relationship itself?
Speaking of counselors and vulnerability, I was struggling with this. And, we mentioned earlier that intimate relationships aren't just romantic relationships. So like I want to have a deeper connection with my father. We were estranged for a very long time. And one of the things that I had talked about in some of my counseling sessions was I hate how surfacey our conversations are. They're like, how's work? Good. How's the weather out there? Good. I mean, it was fucking boring. And we would do this for like an hour and then be like, cool, thanks. And then we would talk to each other again the following month. I mean, just seeing his name come up on my screen was just so boring. And I remember telling my counselor, God, I hate how surfacey these are. And she's like, you're the reason why they're surfacey. You're not willing to, share anything. You're not willing to put yourself out there. She's like, I guarantee you that once you start to put yourself out there, that person will then feel that safe enough that they can reciprocate it. Sometimes it requires us being the first one to share, to be open, to be vulnerable. Because after that, I did notice a shift. And then my dad started sharing more with me, and the relationship has been able to deepen because of it.
Yeah, right, because you're going to have you're going to have some surfacey stuff, right? You're going to have some catching up stuff. I haven't seen you, blah, blah, blah. How was your trip? Oh, the weather was beautiful. But then you get to the deeper things. But if you stay up there the whole time, it's exhausting because you feel like I don't have anything to really talk to about this person, or they're not even interested in me. So there's actually 7 key factors for intimacy. Yes, you're going to need to have trust, acceptance, honesty, safety. Safety is huge for, I think, most things, especially if you want to be growing. Number 5 is compassion, affection, and communication. These are things that you will need to have in order to increase the closeness in personal relationships.
How fascinating. Because I'm still just even just fixated on, God damn it, we want intimacy, but God damn it, it's so hard. So I know we have this fear of vulnerability, and you kind of alluded to another reason why I think that it's hard for us to be vulnerable, which is, intimacy versus sex. I think a lot of us confuse intimacy and sex, and they're not synonymous at all. And oftentimes, we'll associate love with sexual activity. And one study found or reported that 80% of people said that the definition of intimacy is sex. And that, sex with a partner can absolutely build intimacy. But as we all know, not all sex is intimate. I say we all know. Maybe you don't. It is possible to have intimacy without sex and sex without intimacy. But the problem is when we confuse the two, it can lead us to feeling sad, angry, used, or betrayed when we fail to satisfy our needs of intimacy or closeness during sex. So I think it's important to understand that sex is not intimacy and intimacy is not sex. This last one that I kind of came up with as I was reflecting on why I felt intimacy was so hard, I have no role model. I have no role models of what a healthy relationship looks like. So if we're looking to build relationships based on genuine feeling of equality and vulnerability, I don't know what the hell that looks like. And most of us do not know or have role models to show us what a healthy, loving, and meaningful relationship looks like. And so, in fact, for many of us, we grew up looking to our parents, which, speaking from experience, were completely dysfunctional, unhealthy, and distrustful relationships. And this was the main point of reference for the relationships I would engage in later on in my life.
I mean, I'm sitting here yeah, of course, role models. And where would we find these, right? I mean, I'm trying to think, it's it would be inappropriate for teachers to do it.
It would, but I mean, you and I have talked about this off air before, which is, I think that there's 1 or 2 couples that I'd be like, now they really have a strong bond, a strong level of intimacy and love for each other. But the majority of couples that I know, I'd be like, nah, I'm good. I'm gonna pass on that.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I have 2 couples that are my gold standard of coupling, and I love them so completely. And I also love how they show up in the world. And I think a big part of it is that they don't compromise who's around for their relationship. They continue to be the same in every single space, in every situation, because at the end of the day, their relationship is what matters most. And they're not doing this song and dance of there's all these other people around, and that's kind of where I want to get to. I'm not there yet. I'm feeling some song and dance thingies happening. But it's definitely something where I want to have that security and assurance that it doesn't matter, that the relationship, what we've built has so much more. And I think that's true with other types of relationships as well, not just your romantic relationships. There are certain friendships that I know that because we've experienced, emotional, intellectual, even experiential, if we're able to talk in depth about these things or share these pieces of ourselves, we have an intimate relationship.
Yes, we do. So you had mentioned was it 8 things that we needed for?
7 key factors.
7 key factors. In addition to having those 7 key factors, what have you done to foster a more intimate relationship?
I have done that analysis in my head. Is this somebody that I want to have that with? Because it might not be a person that I want to have that conversation with. It may also be a situation where I feel like I'm not ready to have that conversation. I'm not ready to disclose this piece of myself that feels just scary is what it is. Like I'm just not ready to do it. And so kind of tuning into yourself and realizing just because there's an opportunity for intimacy doesn't mean you have to take it. Just like if you were talking about sex, you don't have to have it all the time. Like just because one person does, another person doesn't. Like you still want to have that emotional consent. You still want to be in a space where you feel like, okay, this is safe and it's something that could be reciprocated. Not that it has to be, because I think that that's the other thing too, that some people get into this like tit for tat. Well, I told you something personal, now you have to tell me something personal. That's not how it works, bro. Like just because you're willing to disclose, like I appreciate that, I may not be there. And so understanding that it's a process and that we're all in different stages of our development, of our emotional growth, maturity, all of those things, and being able to respect that and understanding that it's not about you. It's about yourself, and really having, I think, that respect for the other person that you're in a relationship with.
I'd like to add to that. And again, I'm just speaking from my own experience. The first step that I did was to develop or strengthen my self-awareness. And the reason why I think that that is probably the first step is because, you might be avoiding intimacy for reasons that you're not even aware of. I know that I wasn't. And it wasn't until I went to some of my therapy sessions that my counselor and I together uncovered several events and people in my life that have fostered this fear of vulnerability. And over time, I began to process those experiences, which lessened, not eliminated, but lessened my fear of being vulnerable. So, I mean, again, being vulnerable is scary. Second thing I started doing was communicate. Now, I know this sounds super easy, but it's not. From my experience, that I've learned that communication is the key or the foundation of any relationship. I'd always tell my husband, don't assume that I'm just some mind reader. I mean, it'd be kind of cool if I was. But you're not. But I'm not. And if you're afraid of letting people in, communicate that to your partner. Because I did. I would tell Vince, like, this is very hard for me to share. And I would explain why. But it brought us to the same playing field. And so together we were able to work on creating a more psychological safety space for me to feel comfortable enough to share. The third thing that I did, and it's something that you kind of talked a little bit on earlier, which was to make time for each other. Make a concerted effort to spend time together. And what I mean by that, it's not, yes, planning a date night is nice, but when a person is, checking the sports scores, Vince, or like me checking social media or texting, emailing, that's not being present, kind of what you were talking about. So make a concerted effort to be present with that other person. And lastly, again, Cydia, you hit on this topic too, which was include them to basically participate in your life. So sharing ideas and projects and stuff, I was terrible about this. I did everything on my own. So I'm just going to give like a short story, which was, the house that I'm in right now is a house that I bought before I married my husband. And so after we got married, I would try to be like, try to make this house a home, and I would try to invite him into it. And he's like, this is your house. This is your house. Like, it wasn't a we thing or anything like that. And that was, I think, reinforced by the fact that I chose everything, decorations, paint color and stuff like that. So I'm in the process of painting my house a different color. And I actually invited him to help me find the color. And so, we were able to go several times to, Lowe's and stuff like that to find the paint color. He was actually one that found the paint color that we're going to be using. And so the other night, thank you, applause. Pause here for applause. And so it just was nice because last night I asked him, do you feel like this is more of your house? He's like, absolutely. And I said, what do you think accounted for that? And he's like, just where we are. And I think that that's because we've grown as a couple. We've both been vulnerable. We've both communicated, made concerted efforts to spend time with each other, and started to include the other person in things. Not to say that that person needs to be, in every aspect of your life, because you do need like some time for yourself. But including them in things like that really brought Vince and I together.
I think that's beautiful. And it touches on, the romantic aspect. You can also apply that to the platonic relationships that you have, right? Spending quality time. Like we call them the squad. There's a group of us, but we all, I think, make a concerted effort to spend one-on-one time with each other as opposed to just all of us together all the time. And I like that. I think that that's important, in making sure that you are spending one-on-one time with those friends and relationships that you want that increased intimacy in, right? Because it is a way of including them in your world. And I love what you talk about the inclusion part, because I felt the same way as Vince, of like, no, this is Matt's house. And when I'm in a mood, I'm like, oh no, this is your house. Like I will definitely,
that Latina side has to pop up sometimes.
She pops up and she's like, no, this is your house. This is your problem. But feeling that inclusion. And I think a big thing that helped us was, my mom at the time was working at a furniture store. And so she had like a mad employee discount, and I just met his parents, and his parents had threatened to throw out the couch, because this couch was like, it was such a man cave. Like he had like this old couch that was it was dirty and falling apart. Like one of the couch sides was literally like falling apart. Like if you sat on it wrong, like it would go flying off. And so they were like, when we come back in the fall, if this is still here, your dad's going to take one end, I'm going to take the other end. We're going to go toss it out, and then we're going to go buy what we want. And so then I came out and I was like, first of all, you're a grown ass man. We're not letting your parents buy you a couch. And like hell am I going to let them pick out the couch that I'm going to be sitting on fucking year round. So it helped us, basically put a fire under his ass, and having my mom with the employee discount. So we went and we ended up picking up all custom furniture together, and it became our space, because it was that integration. It wasn't anything that was, oh, this was his before, this was mine before, and we combined. Like it was all brand new things that we were able to pick together, where, there were even these, I call them our reading chairs. I liked a certain style and he liked a different style, and we were having a really hard time. And I was like, well, we want to get the matching set. And at the time my mom was like, well, why don't you just make the fabric the same, and then they'll still be matching, but they'll be the different chairs that you guys each want. I was like, oh, that's genius. And so that's what we did.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I know for our listeners out there that think like, oh, intimacy, vulnerability, that's too scary. I'm not ready. I found this study to be super interesting, which is studies have shown that infants will fail to thrive if they do not experience physical and emotional closeness from another human being. And that this need for
the baby killing study. Like, no, literally a bunch of babies died.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know. Did not go into that.
Yeah, no, they did this study with babies, and they literally just gave them food and water, but they didn't give them any kind of physical or emotional touches, and the babies all started to die, and so they had to pull the plug on the
cruel
study.
Absolutely cruel. Okay, not where I was going with this, but okay, it kind of establishes what I'm trying to say here, which is that this need for connection and closeness never goes away and will continue throughout our entire lives. And without human connection, it is no surprise that we become susceptible to things like depression, anxiety, addiction. So this need for intimacy, even though it might be scary, it's a necessity. That's it for this episode. Find us on Instagram at Pivotal Moments HQ for all the behind the scenes and sister-like banter you know and love. We want to thank our producer and music director, Ron Johnson. This has been an Astronomicus DMR Info Productions podcast.